Welcome to She is Resilient, a podcast for women on their healing journeys who are ready to start living their most authentic and empowered lives outside of survival mode. I'm your host, Tatiana, trauma and somatic therapist, as well as a holistic coach, and I'm on a mission to help more women heal their nervous systems. Each week, me and my guests are going to get real and vulnerable about the experiences that led us to becoming the empowered and resilient women we are today. You'll leave this podcast with the skills, knowledge, and inspiration to start creating the life you deserve. Because if another woman can do it, so can you. Welcome back to another episode of She is Resilient. Today we have Alexis on the podcast. Alexis, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Tell our audience who you are and what you do for a living.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tatiana, for having me here today. So my name is Alexis Becerra. I am by training a licensed marriage and family therapist turned leadership coach for Latina professionals. I'm super excited to share about my healing journey and us, where we get to where we are today.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I know a little bit, I know bits and pieces of your story, so I'm really excited to learn more about you and hear more about your healing journey and what led you to become the human that you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think healing is in phases, and it's never like a one time and then we've healed and then we've moved forward. And I think it really starts on it at like a young age and really making different decisions for yourself without even fully really knowing it. I'm the oldest daughter of five. I am fifth generation Mexican American from my mom's side, but I'm first generation from my dad's. And so growing up for me as the eldest daughter was really, really hard. It's probably why I still don't have children. And, as much as I loved being an eldest sibling, it was really difficult because I definitely took the role as like a co-parent growing up. And that became even more difficult when my parents started having their own struggles in their marriage and ended up, my dad ended up struggling with alcoholism. And so by the time they got divorced, and then by the time I was 16, my mom was unfortunately addicted to drugs. And so that whole process was pretty difficult in the sense that I was watching my family and my parents fall apart.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's really hard, especially as a young teenager. During that time, did you have to take on more responsibility, or were you already having a lot of responsibility by then?
Yeah, so I definitely already had a lot of responsibilities of like being a third caretaker in the sense. But I mean, there was a point to where I was helping my mom, like back in the day when you actually had to balance checkbooks or do things like that. Like I was helping, navigate money systems. So I knew how much money was in the house, and which I was always like cautious and worried about helping with getting my siblings up for school, especially when she became a single mom. So I'd wake up, get ready, then wake them up, get ready after school, taking them to school, then after school, homework and dinner and certain things. And then once my mom began using substances, she would be gone for like a week at a time, and we were left alone. And so I was definitely the sole caretaker. And looking back, how crazy it is to be 12, 13, 14, 15 by yourself at home with four younger siblings and still trying to navigate school and be normal on the outside.
Yeah. How were you able to navigate all of that? Did you have support from other teachers or coaches or mentors or any other family members? How were you able to kind of navigate all of that?
Um, no, I'll say no, because
Mhm.
the one thing once my family found out that my mom was pretty into drugs was the one thing they said was like, why didn't you say anything?
Mm,
But we grew up with this idea that what happens at home stays at home.
yeah.
Don't tell anybody anything.
Hmm.
And it's almost like a betrayal if you do tell people the problems that are happening at home. So
Hmm.
when my tias would call and ask for my mom, I would just say she was working,
Hmm.
even though I hadn't seen her or heard from her for a couple days.
Hmm.
Um, and so people didn't really know what was happening.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because like by the time I was 15, my friend was driving already at 16. And so she'd pick me up and we'd drop my siblings off at daycare in the morning so they could catch the bus. And like nobody asked questions,
Hmm. Hmm.
nobody asked questions. I actually, even at one point in high school, got Saturday school because I was late to first period
Hmm.
um, every morning because I was taking my siblings to school and like taking them once, dropping them off at like their daycare, and then the other one I'd drop off at Head Start and then get
Hmm.
to school. And so I remember telling my principal that there was no way I could get there in time because I had to do this. And he said that that wasn't my responsibility, but um, I had to be at school on time.
Hmm.
And I got Saturday school for it.
Wow.
I got punished for doing that. And there was never any type of support.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Instead of offering support, instead of asking more
Mhm.
questions, instead of trying to
Mhm.
figure out what's going on, they
Mhm.
punished you for
Mhm.
being late. And you
Yeah.
clearly did not have the capacity to make it to school on time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think I was definitely in survival mode because there wasn't any other option, right? Like
Mhm.
that, I wasn't going to like not take care of my siblings. I wasn't gonna not let them eat.
Mhm.
I mean, there was even times where I knew I was rationing food, and it's crazy when you look back. And yes, we were all smaller and skinnier at times, like growing up. But then when I look back, I was like, wow, I think I was way skinnier because I was rationing food so that
Yeah.
our siblings could all eat. And it was just that. It was like, I have to make sure we're okay and taking care of us.
Mhm.
So I definitely think there was that portion of survival, but there was also this mentality that school's going to get me to where I need to go next.
Mhm.
And school's going to get me so I don't ever have to live like this. And
Mhm.
so I really buckled down with school, but it definitely took a toll when things were like when shit hit the fan, when things were
Mhm.
really, really bad. And my
Mhm.
mom was definitely not present and okay to be a parent at all
Mhm.
at that point. Like my grades tanked for sure. And I went from being nearly a 4.0 student to like a 2.0. And I managed to keep it enough because I wanted to play sports.
Mhm.
But it was really, really, really hard. Really,
Mhm.
really hard. And
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to go to college. Like I literally had thought that. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to go um,
And you
to
did, and you
typical.
made it to
Yeah.
college.
Yeah,
So
I
can you
did.
tell us about that process?
Okay, so I essentially was like, it's like sophomore, junior year was probably the roughest with grades because of that was one of the hardest times. By the end of my junior year, going into my senior year, my mom essentially had lost custody of us, and so I went to live with Thea for like the last year of school, and during that time, I just really, really tried to buckle down on my grades. And
Mhm.
so I applied to state schools and I got in. And during that time, I was like, honestly, I was like, shit, how am I going to do this? Like, how am I going to make this? And
Mhm.
so I always worked and I essentially just worked almost full time during
Mhm.
college and to the point where people were like, I didn't have a normal college life experience, like the experience that people are out partying,
Mhm.
spring breaks, things like that. That was never, ever what I experienced. It was
Mhm.
work and school.
Mhm.
And by that time, my siblings were in foster care. And so I'd spend weekends with them.
Mm.
I didn't want them to feel alone or by themselves. And so
Yeah.
my college experience was very, very different. And, I essentially started off as a kinesiology major. I thought I wanted to work on, like be a physical therapist because I was an athlete for a lot of the time. And so I was like, I want to like work on athletes. And as I was in school, I really realized I was like, I love studying humans, which
Mhm.
ultimately leads to where we're at today. And
Yeah.
and so I ended up, double majoring in history and sociology. And then that was also the time of one of our recessions. So I was like, what am I going to do?
Hmm.
And so, it ultimately led to me into really figuring out that I wanted to give back to our community and give back to like where I came from.
Yeah.
Because the biggest thing I always say is like, nobody asked, are you okay?
Yeah.
Nobody asked me
Hmm.
that. And when I was 16, like, although I was more present of an adult than the adults in my life,
Hmm.
I had no rights over my life. None,
Mm. Yeah.
none. And I knew I wanted to give back to that population because I came from that. And it's one of the hardest. It's like you're expected to act like an adult, but treated like a child and
Hmm.
with all the rights of a child. And yet it feels very, very, very difficult in the sense of if you don't have one person helping you or hoping for you or there as your support, like honestly, you just need one person to
Right.
believe in you,
Yeah.
in your ability. And so I also recognize, I was with my high school sweetheart for 16, like we ended up dating 16 years together. And
Hmm. Wow.
I've recognized like I stayed in that relationship way too long
Hmm.
because I was holding on to everything. I had lost everything. I'd lost
Yeah.
my family. I'd lost my parents. I'd lost at that point our home. And I clung on to the one thing I felt like was love, was connection, family. And looking back, like I know I stayed way too long.
Hmm.
Um, I don't regret it.
Hmm.
But you don't realize then in the moment that you're holding on to something that you should probably be letting go,
Yeah.
for the sake of a fear of losing another thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Was this relationship a healthy relationship where you were able to lean on them during these difficult times?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was. I mean, we were kids growing up, right? And so it's like the best it could be as
Hmm.
teenagers and
Yeah.
then we went to college together and
Hmm.
we eventually bought a home together, things like that. So
Hmm.
he definitely witnessed so much of my experience since we met when I was 15. And um so it was definitely something I leaned into and leaned on, and he supported the best of his ability as a young man can, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
So this all happened during college. You were working full time, you were going to school full time, you were in this relationship, you were visiting your siblings on the weekends while they were in foster care. And, I just want to point out, I think it makes sense that you went into the field that you're in, right? Because I think all of us kind of go into the field of psychology or mental health because we have our own experiences that led us here, right? And I think it just makes sense. And I love that you really wanted to focus on helping your community and giving back. So after college, you did you go right into your master's program right after?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
And that, yeah, that was, yeah, I worked 3 jobs during my master's.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is a lot. And I can absolutely relate to you on that. when you're living in survival mode, and I don't know if this is the case for you, I think it becomes so normal to live in this sympathetic state, right? And so I was also working two jobs. I had my internship. I was in school full time.
Mhm.
It's a lot. And I don't think people realize how intense it is. But I think, again, like when you're in the state of survival mode, it doesn't seem as intense because that's what you're used to. That's what your brain and your nervous system is used to. So I can totally relate to you
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was crazy because there was one night I was in like family therapy practicum and it was an evening because we'd have families come in and, we'd be doing work. And I kept getting this phone call, kept getting. I was like, who's calling me? And so finally I walk out, take the call. It's bail bonds.
Mm,
I'm like, they are asking if I'd bail my mom out of jail.
mm, mhm.
And I remember thinking, are you fucking kidding me? Like,
Yeah.
I'm literally working three jobs. Like,
Mhm,
I've been supporting myself since I was essentially 16 years old.
mhm,
I'm in my last semester of grad school, and I'm being asked to bail my mom out of jail. And
mhm.
I literally took a deep breath and was like, no.
Wow.
I said no.
Mhm,
And I was like, I told him, I said, you can tell her if I've gone almost 30 years without going to jail, she should try it too.
oh, wow. Wow. Were you in any kind of healing at this point? Were you in therapy at this point or anything else?
Yeah, so I had done therapy like a little bit, but
Mhm.
it wasn't until really into my grad school program that I started to really, you start identifying like, hey, this is what's been going on with me.
Yeah.
Um, this is why my family's this way. And then you start
Mhm.
recognizing the different signs and really understanding. And I think for me, I remember in grad school, I couldn't meditate more than 5 minutes because I didn't know how to calm my mind. I didn't know how to, it felt, but it was then when I was being truly introduced to the understanding of why things were happening, how it was impacting me, and
Mhm.
what I needed to do to take care of myself.
Mhm. Yeah. What was that moment like for you when you said, no, I am not bailing her out?
In that moment, like I felt angry, I felt empowered,
Yeah.
and I felt sad also because it's like, this is my mom.
Hmm.
And, you grew up being told like you have to do things for your parents, you need to always be there by their side. And I never thought I'd get to that point,
Hmm.
but I had just given so much for so long. And it was like, I'm still taking care of you in some capacity
Hmm.
and in the decisions you're making. And I just was like, I don't have to. I just
Right.
don't have to. Like,
Yeah.
I'm literally working three jobs to survive right now. I
Yeah.
just, it's just flat, like appalled.
Right. In that moment, it sounds like you really did kind of take your power back and you
Mhm,
were able to
mhm,
honor yourself for once, right? You were prioritizing you in
mhm,
that moment.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's this sense also of guilt that comes in, like I'm letting my mom stay in, jail and things like that. And
Yeah.
mind you, at this point, she had already even gone to prison when I was in undergrad.
Hmm.
And so, and I went to visit her
Hmm.
every month.
Hmm.
And so that was a whole experience in its own to like visit your mom,
Hmm.
hoping that she would make better choices when she came out.
Hmm.
And I understand addiction. I completely understand it. But being the daughter of somebody who's experienced that is
Hmm.
really, really hard. Really,
Yeah.
really hard.
1000%. And I think that understanding it is different than tolerating behaviors, right? You can
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
everyone's behavior, right? We can
Mhm.
understand trauma. We can understand why people, got into the situation that they're in, right? But just because you understand and you have empathy doesn't mean that you have to continue to enable or tolerate behavior.
Agree. Agreed. Yeah. I think oftentimes when people are making these really poor decisions, they come at it from a very like victim mentality. And I saw that a lot from my mom. But I thought she's not aware of the impact we've had, right? Like my sister was like 4 or 5 years old and had not like had a parent, my younger sister and my siblings, and what the toll that was being taken on us, like being in this intense survival mode of work, 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 school, grind, like this is what's going to get me out of the life I came from. And the harm my siblings were experiencing in foster care. And it's like the one thing I always say is like, she was all we had left.
Right.
And she chose drugs over us. And that was one of the hardest things as a child, as her child to to acknowledge and experience. And um, you know,
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how it was impacting your personal life. So not
yeah,
just at work, but what were you noticing in yourself behaviorally, emotionally, physically, all of those things?
yeah. I think for myself, the one thing I noticed is I didn't know how to not
Mm.
give so much of myself because that's all I had ever done.
Hmm.
And so even when it came to the families, to the youth I'd be serving, I felt like I had to give, give, give. And I didn't understand this idea of like, you can only give so much because they have to meet you halfway because you
Hmm.
can't be working harder than they are.
Hmm.
Like, and so I didn't know that. So there really wasn't boundaries around how much of myself to hold back on and how much to give. I just gave, gave, and gave.
Hmm.
And personally, I was so drained. It was unbelievable how drained I was really early on. And I recognized it wasn't just the families I was stepping up for, like when a manager got let go or they were interim, like I was stepping into these roles
Hmm.
as to support onboarding, to support the team. So it was like I was always taking these lead roles because they needed to happen. It needed to happen to function. But that's the only way I knew how to do life because that was always my role. That was always
Exactly.
my role. And
Yeah.
so I ended up recognizing, like, okay, mentally, like that was the only way I knew how to think.
Hmm.
But early on, I started recognizing signs in my body. First started out with, I remember getting hives on my face and I was like, this is weird, and I went to the doctor and the doctor's like, you must eat fish or you must be developing some allergy or something.
Oh boy.
And initially I was like, well, I did eat ceviche like a week ago or something, right? I swear I was like, okay, maybe it is that. Maybe I am. And then a few months later, it happened again.
Hmm.
And full, but like pretty intensely.
Hmm.
And by this time, I've always been pretty physically active, so I wasn't really taking care of my body. I wasn't like really working out. I recognized like my health, like even eating habits, like because you're just in survival. Like I'd eat whatever I could fast, quick, which it wasn't always the best. I'd
Hmm.
get home so drained from work that times I'd just like sink into the couch and eat like a bowl of cereal, or like I wasn't truly taking care of myself.
Hmm.
Um, but the second time I had the really bad blowout of hives, they just want to give you cortisone shots and tell you it's an allergic. And I told her, I said, I think this is stress. I truly think this is stress. And it was
Hmm.
the first time I felt pretty gaslit by
Hmm.
a medical provider because she literally was like, no, this isn't stress. This is like, she pretty much, and I was like, I don't know, like this feels very different. And it's like, like, something is wrong with you differently, but you're going to your medical providers and you're trusting that they're giving you the best advice. But I'm also somebody who doesn't really believe in, I want shots for everything. I need pills for everything. I just was like, there's something happening and help me understand. And she wasn't the person. So much that I ended up changing doctors because I truly didn't feel, I felt very gaslit, very gaslit in that appointment. And I chose to have a doctor, a person of color. I was like, I want somebody. And fast forward, she ends up being the person who really is like, you're quitting your job. Like years later,
That's a good provider.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was the moments I started recognizing like something is wrong and you're trying to make sense of it, but you don't fully know because we've learned in grad school, but like the real intense of experiencing it is so differently when you're in the moment, and then you have to still show up to work the next day. You still have to like be your best self, and life still goes on, right? The bills are still coming. Like you need rent, you need this. Like it's just life. Life keeps lifing.
Yep.
And so I started noticing that. I started noticing my relationship. I would say, there was like an awareness, like huge life trend. Like it was like life was really opening up in different capacities. Like my eyes were being opened differently. Like I was in survival mode, but in a different way at that point. Like I didn't have to work 3 jobs. I had one job, right? But it felt like looking back, it was like I was working 3 jobs. But I was able to have awareness of like, is this really what I want? Is this who I want to be with? And so there was just a lot happening with, is this what I see myself doing for the rest of my life? But I've always wanted to give back to my community. So there was a lot of questions starting to happen. So what ended up happening first, like I felt like it was like a catapult of different things that launched, So I ended up ending my 16-year relationship.
Wow.
Yep. Ending my 16-year relationship. I ended up really like taking control of my life. I left my job. I moved into another job. I ended up solo traveling for the first time ever and loved it, and like backpacked around Europe and really started like reclaiming everything I wished I did, and always had these visions and ideas. And it was just like these huge footsteps that I was like leaping into. And despite being scared and unknown of what was happening, I was doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you ultimately left the country and decided to move somewhere else. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So obviously I stayed in the field, but moved jobs, and I worked in school-based mental health for quite a bit of time. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, we have a national pandemic with adolescent suicidality rates. I mean, the US Surgeon Journal had spoken about that. And so things just got really, really rough. And again, the hives came back. Wouldn't leave. I felt a completely like not who I was anymore. And I was pretty much told by my doctor, like, you need to take a medical leave. We're concerned about your health. We're concerned about your heart health. We're concerned about all these things. I was working out 2 hours a day, not drinking, not, taking care of myself, doing everything society says is great.
Yeah. Right.
And there was this huge moment when I had decided to take medical leave that I was looking around my apartment and I was like, this can all be replaced. This can all be replaced. It's just material things. In the end, the money I have saved will stay in the bank if I die, realistically.
Right.
If I buy a house, it's going to be there, but I won't. And so I decided to pack up everything, sell a bunch of stuff, and condense my things to like 3 suitcases. And I left to Colombia.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I backpacked for 2 months. I ended up at this Buddhist retreat in the like hillside of outside of Medellin and Guatape, and it was probably everything and I needed and didn't know. I felt years of things shedding off of me. This
Mm-hmm.
silent retreat. Um, did more yoga than I ever have in my life,
Mm.
and I truly fell in love with falling into my body again and
I love that.
truly feeling.
I
Mm-hmm.
love that so much.
Yeah.
So now,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe who you are today? Who is Alexis now?
Oh my God, you're gonna make me cry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy.
Yeah.
I feel a sense of freedom and this ability that anything is possible. And I always felt that before, but there's this true sense of like anything is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I deserve to feel this sense of peace.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd say I'm still incredibly strong and courageous and brave.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even leaving and feeling guilt of like, I'm not being a good sister. I think I'm an even better sister now. And I'm an
Mm-hmm.
even better friend. Um, I'm an even better mentor
Mm-hmm.
and leader for it. Yeah.
Mm. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Yeah.
You have been through so much in your life, and I talk about resiliency a lot through a nervous system lens, right? Like, I think, and I've mentioned this numerous times on this podcast before, but I think that the word resilient or resiliency gets a bad rep,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when I think about resiliency, I really think about your nervous system and how you were able to go through all of these things and still come out on the other side and yet still accomplish all of these things, right? Not just professionally, but as a human, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are happy now. And that to me is success, and that to me is resiliency. And so I'm curious to know, what do you think really supported your nervous system to have this resiliency, to be able to have this capacity to come out on the other side despite everything you've experienced?
I think there was this idea of hope that I've always had, like hope for myself,
Mhm.
hope that things will get better, like hope that this isn't all life is, meant to
Mhm.
be. This
Mhm.
feeling of internal pain and sacrifice
Mhm.
isn't all, but also the courage to go through the hard, muddy shit, right? Like the
Yeah.
real hard, because I will tell you what I felt and experienced in those 2 months and what I felt in that 1 week at that retreat and dealing with all the old stuff that had been put away that you didn't realize. Um, yeah, the courage to go through that and to
Mhm.
know that you're gonna be okay, but you have to go through all of that. You have to. It's gonna feel uncomfortable. It's gonna feel gross. It's gonna feel scary as fuck.
Mhm.
But you have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Look.
I'm so grateful to know you and to learn about you. And thank you so much for being on this podcast and sharing your story and being so vulnerable with not just me, but with our audience. I know that this is not easy to share, and I really do appreciate your willingness to be so open with us. I know that there will be women who listen to this episode who are definitely going to resonate with you. So thank you so much again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana, for having me. I truly appreciate it. Letting me share my story.
Absolutely. Can you share with us how people can connect with you, how they can work with you, what you have going on?
Yeah. So after all my years of being a mental health professional, but oftentimes I was in these leadership roles, I've really decided once I decided I'm launching my own business was to again give back to our community of Latina professional women and utilizing my years of experience as a trained expert, right? And bringing that into the field of coaching to truly support women heal and rebuild from working in unhealthy work environments, amplifying their impact, taking care of themselves, and really truly finding their power again. I think, especially for us as women of color, it's really easy to get to lose all of those things, especially when we're in systems that take. And so I'm on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at it's Alexis Becerra. And I'm currently, my website's almost done, so that's coming. So, and in addition, so I'm doing private coaching right now in the works of possibly developing a group coaching program as well. I'm doing some consult work and professional development as well. So, so if your team would like support and addressing whether it's creating trauma-informed spaces for your team or supporting your leadership team with trauma-informed practices, I think it's super, super critical that we give people these tools, especially as more people of color are moving into leadership roles and need that support. And so really doing, whether it's workshop, professional development, and the one-on-one coaching right now.
I love that. And I am going to add all of that in the show notes so people have full access to that. Thank you so much, Alexis.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tati, for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you absolutely loved this episode, I would so appreciate it if you subscribed and left a review on Apple Podcast, or take a screenshot and share this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at tatiana.holistic.coach. The more nervous systems we reach, the more generational cycles we break, and the more we contribute to a kinder and safer world. And if you're looking for somatic healing services, send me a DM and I'd love to chat on how I can support you. I'll see you in the next episode.